Well, good morning. How are you? Two of you are good. I hope that the rest of you are good as well, additionally. If you're joining us for the first time, as my wife Karen, who was doing the announcements, shared, we are in a bit of a season of transition, and we just sent out a group, and they are now doing a new work in the Warren area. So we spent the last handful of weeks where we just started discussing our vision, kind of who we are as a church. And we gave some new language to it. We didn't get a new mission. That's obviously, you never change the mission of God. That always stays true. But however, we wanted to give words to help clarify who we are as a church. And so our vision is right there on your bulletin. But it's that folks exist to love God, love the one, and make disciples. And so we spent 3 weeks kind of targeting each one of those points. But now we're transitioning from vision to values. You know, what holds this vision up? What is so foundational and instrumental to us as a church? And so this morning I get the privilege of talking about what it means to be a Christ-centered community, that we have put all of our chips in on Jesus. And so that's kind of what we're going to talk about this morning. You always run into a danger when you reference somebody in history. Because when you reference somebody in history, there was good things about these people, there was bad things about these people, and so sometimes you gotta make sure you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I'm gonna give an opening illustration, but there's a reason I'm using this specific illustration. I wanna get to a quote. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr. Gave his most prolific speech that I'm sure all of you could say, "I have a dream" speech. And in that, what we oftentimes miss is the incredible sacrifice that Dr. King had in his pursuit of civil rights. You know, he had his house bombed. He was jailed numerous times. He received constant death threats for what he believed, for what he was chasing after. Like, he had this goal, this golden rule that he was going towards. And what he wanted to see was people of all colors, and that we weren't judged by the color of our skin, but we were judged by the content of our character. And he said, hey, I want my life mission to be about that. And what he realized was he had to give everything to that end if he wanted to see that come about. And in one of his letters, he wrote this: "If a man hasn't discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live." That if a man hasn't discovered something he will die for, he isn't fit to live. I think Dr. King, what he recognized was there was commitments demand everything. Right, that you don't be half-hearted about commitments. Commitments aren't convenient or comfortable, they're costly. Commitments aren't convenient or comfortable, they're costly. And so that's exactly what makes it so powerful, is that it costs something great. And so our time, our talents, our treasure, when we say, hey, this is what I'm giving my life to, and we take everything that we have and we push it in, clearly we believe that costs something. Clearly we believe that it's not something that's simply just convenient. And this is what Jesus is going to get after in our passage today. That Jesus, as he's calling us for our commitment, as he's calling us to give our lives, that he's not asking us to be 1 foot in and 1 foot out. He's saying that if you're going to come and you're going to follow me, it's going to require you to go both feet in. It's going to require your time, your talent, your treasure. It's going to cost you everything. And so following him isn't just a part of our lives, it is our lives. It's something that's central to us. I can still remember in some of my younger years of ministry where God was opening some doors to go and preach in different areas of the world. There was a time when I was in India and I was going to this village that was predominantly Muslim. The church had to remain unmarked, and it felt like a scene out of a movie. Because the van back door opened up and I was quickly shuffled in. And it was kind of like, oh, okay, so what's happening here might not be safe, but was it worth it? Yes. Yes, the call of Jesus on our lives isn't something that has to be comfortable, and it doesn't have to be safe. Like what I want to do from our text today is tell us that if somebody tried to sell you on a Christianity that was comfortable and no risk, then they sold you a Christianity that's not in the scriptures. That this costs something. Most commentators or Bible translators would section this part of your text as the cost of discipleship. That there's a cost to it. I know that the gospel is the free gift of God, right? It's nothing that we can do in and of ourselves, but it was a gift done for us. But man, this gift is costly. This gift is costly. And so I promise you that though you might have been offered a lesser Christianity, that this one is better. Have you ever marveled at the fact that none of the apostles died good deaths? It's not like the book of Hebrews it says, when Peter got really old, he fell asleep one night and he really drifted off into a good dream, and then he stood before the King of Kings. No, none of these guys die well. None of them we would say, oh yeah, I'd love to die like Peter. And maybe you'd say, well, hey, John wasn't martyred. No, John was exiled to Patmos because when they tried to boil him alive in oil and it didn't work, they had to send him to an island because they said, hey, we're just done with you. That's not a good death. We do not have a faith or a worldview that says, give your life to Jesus and watch all your wildest dreams come true. That's become what's popular in modern evangelicalism. It's become what's popular in what's referred to as the prosperity gospel, that when you come to Jesus, watch everything come your way. It's not Skittles. It's not taste the rainbow. No, this costs us something. And so we do have a worldview and a faith, though, that says give your life to Jesus and come what may. If difficulty comes, if storm comes, if trial comes, he'll be enough. That 2 Corinthians chapter 12, when Paul says, hey, there's this thorn in my side, there's this thing happening in my life, and God, I'm pleading with you to rid this of my life. And what does God say back to him? My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Come what may, he and his grace will be enough. And so I believe this passage this morning offers something contrary to popular evangelicalism. It's not pie in the sky, it's not flash in the pan, but it is something better. You'll never find a better deal to give your life to than what Jesus talks about in our text. And so we're going to follow 3 points from this text. The first is that Jesus will lay out a high cost of following him. That's verses 25 and 27. The second, he will give the importance of counting the cost before you begin. That's verses 28 to 33. And he's going to conclude with a vivid illustration about how if salt loses its taste, it becomes worthless. That's verses 34 to 35. And so here's, if we could walk away with one thing today, I'd encourage you to take out your phone, take a picture of this next slide. But this next quote is what I would love for you to walk away with. When we come to Christ, we're no longer the most important person in the world to us. Christ is. Instead of living only for ourselves, we have a higher goal, to live for Jesus. That was the late Dr. Billy Graham. And I may sound like a broken record for these last couple of weeks, months, but the reason why I wanted to draw attention to this quote is because we have a society and a culture, we have a world that is begging and pleading for you to be number one. Like billions of dollars every year are spent on advertisements to get you to feel like you're number one, and that if they can get you to feel like number one, you'll buy their product. But we have a culture, social media, from all these angles we're being told, your life is what matters most. And I just want to, for the remainder, the next 30 minutes that I have with you, to convince you that a life worth following Christ is a life worth losing. That's so biblical. Jesus says, he who desiring to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses their life for my sake and the sake of the gospel finds it. Man, you can live for your pleasures, you can live for your dreams, you can live for all these things that you think will bring you happiness, but I'm telling you, if it's void of Christ, you will have lost your life. We're talking strong this morning. So my first point the high cost of following Christ. This is Luke 14, verses 25 to 27. A large crowd was following Jesus. He turned around and said to them, "If anyone wants to be my disciple, you must, by comparison, hate everyone else. Your father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, even your own life. Otherwise, you cannot be my disciple. And if you do not carry your own cross and follow me, you cannot be my disciple." That sounds like easy believism, doesn't it? Are you with me today? It does not sound like easy believism. Jesus is not setting a low bar. And unfortunately, there's different models of doing church, and I'm not here to try to say that this one's the best one of doing it, but there's a movement that probably started in the 70s that was called the seeker model. And what the seeker model aimed to do was put on a service that kind of felt like not so different from the world. And so it was an easy in for somebody to say, okay, let me try out this Christianity thing. It'll be kind of a safe, easy test to do. Maybe they'll put on a secular song in worship, or maybe hardly reference scripture. But it was this idea that if we can get them in the door, if we can lower the bar for them, they'll easily get in, they'll easily experience what it means to be a Christian. But a low bar is not what it means to be a Christian. They've sold a Christianity that is not one that Jesus does. If we're just taking Jesus at his word, here's what we see. Here's what happens in our text. It says, when a large crowd was accompanying Jesus. These are people who likely admired him for his teachings, for his miracles. But I'd love for you to do a case study on this in the New Testament. I did it this past week, but you watch every time that a large crowd accompanies Jesus and then he begins to teach, what happens? It dwindles. Oftentimes, typically to the 12. And so you have this large crowd that's following Jesus, and hey, it makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Hey, we're getting word out. Jesus is coming to Sterling Heights this week. Man, I'm expecting fish and chips for lunch. I'm expecting, hey, I ran 20 miles yesterday. My ankles are kind of hurting. If I can touch the hem of his garment, I'm going to feel like I could do it again. Right? Jesus comes in and we see these miracles and we see these things. It makes sense of like, yeah, if Jesus is coming to a town, you better not miss it if he comes to a town near you. And so Luke, the master detailer, Luke's gospel account gives us the most details of any other account of the gospel accounts. Luke makes a note to let us know that this was a large crowd that was following Jesus. He doesn't do so by accident. You would think, if you're a first century Jew, what is your belief about the Messiah? Your belief about the Messiah is that he's going to come and he's going to establish a kingdom. He's going to overthrow Rome, and he's going to have an earthly kingdom right here, right now. And so you got to imagine every time you see a large crowd accompanying Jesus, you're thinking, could this be it? Could this be the time where he's going to gather enough people, win enough people over that we're going to handle Rome? And then it's like, oh, Jesus, please do not put a high bar up. Please don't. And then Jesus, hey, whoever wants to be my disciple, hate everybody else. Whoa. Jesus, hold up a second. Don't you think you could give them an easier on-ramp than that? Those seem like very strong words. And one thing that I want to note before we continue to move is that I think sometimes we could look at a passage like this one and we could say, wow, that's loving Jesus more than anything and everyone else, like that seems like a good idea. I hope that I can get there one day. Jesus is not saying this is in the back room, that after you've been here for a while, after you've grown and developed and you've walked faithfully with Jesus for 50 years, that you could get to this point. No, he's literally saying this is the front door. He's saying upon entry, if you're desiring to come and follow me at the very beginning, this is what it costs. It means that you are going to love me more than anyone else. I think the fact that Luke acknowledges, hey, there's a large crowd, makes the words of, if you want to be my disciple, you must by comparison hate everyone else, makes it very strange. Like, Jesus, you blew it. I think what we're learning is that Jesus isn't about easy believism. He isn't about shallow followers of Jesus. He is looking for followers who are going to give the totality of their lives. Their greatest of allegiances have to be to Jesus, not to mom and dad, not to brother and sister, not even your own life. And so it's important to see that this word hate doesn't actually mean hate in the Greek. It's a Semitic term used for a love less. And what Jesus is saying is that your love for me ought to make every other relationship pale in comparison. He's saying that it should be obvious where your allegiance lies. And so he's not looking to become a part of a crowded life. He's looking to become the center of your life, where all life derives from. Which, in this original context, when a person was converting to Judaism, there was an expectation that you took a period of time in your life and you reevaluated every relationship, you reevaluated your life, and what became central to you was your identity as a Jew and the Jewish law. And so Jesus is talking to people that understand how to convert. And he's saying, hey, just like that, it has to be me. It's not the Jewish law. It's not a list of commands. It's a person. And he goes, I become central to your identity. I become your greatest of loves that nothing can compare to. This is parallel to Matthew 10:37, where it says, if you love your father or mother more than me, you're not worthy of being mine. Or if you love son or daughter more than me, you're not worthy of being mine. When you look at this teaching, there's something to take note of. Was Jesus compares your love for him not to nominal loves, but to the greatest of loves. He's talking to a context that's Eastern. Eastern traditions value family way more than us Westerners do. And my guess is that there's a good amount of you that have a high affinity for your family. But in the Eastern world, I mean, when I went in India, it wasn't uncommon to have 3 or 4 generations under a roof. I mean, family is it. It's everything. And Jesus is saying, no, not family isn't everything. I'm everything. And I have to be the greatest of allegiances. Think about it this way. On your wedding day, for those that are married here, on your wedding day, you looked at your person. And what you did is you made a covenant, you made a promise that you're number one to me. It's no longer my mom and dad. You know I spent 20-some years under their roof, and they taught me about life, and they shaped my life in some really profound ways. But if there's a problem between mom and dad and you, well, guess what? You win. You win. It doesn't mean that you hate it doesn't mean you hate your family. It doesn't mean you hate your friends. But your spouse holds the highest place in your life. Man, we live in a world today where, a majority of marriages that struggle because there's a divided allegiance. Right? You want to honor your mom and dad, but your spouse becomes your greatest of allegiances. And that's what Jesus is calling to. He says, you're the bride, I'm the bridegroom, and that's what this relationship is. And so what does this mean for us? It means that the following Christ is not convenience, but it's surrender. Jesus uses an imagery of carrying a cross, a symbol of death and sacrifice. The question is, are we willing to die to ourselves daily? Are we willing to die to our own dreams and ambitions, even relationships, if they compete with our loyalty to Christ? Dietrich Bonhoeffer once said, when Christ calls a man, he bids him to come and die. This is the call to following Christ. Teaching point number 2, if you're taking notes, counting the cost. This is verses 28 to 33. But don't begin until you count the cost, for who would begin construction of a building without first calculating the cost to see if there's enough money to finish it? Otherwise, you might complete only the foundation before running out of money, and then everyone would laugh at you. They would say, there's the person who started that building and couldn't afford to finish it. Or what king would go to war against another king without first sitting down with his counselors to discuss whether his army of 10,000 could defeat the soldiers of 20,000 marching against him? And if he can't, he will send a delegation to discuss terms of peace while the enemy is still far away. So you cannot become my disciple without giving up everything you own. And so here Jesus gives two illustrations in our text. He talks about building and he talks about going to war. Both illustrations really emphasize the same thing. They're a little bit different. They work together well. But what you see is before you commit to something, take time. Think about it. Evaluate it. Be critical of it. Because ultimately, if you're going to go all in, you have to go all in. You can't do it halvesies. It doesn't work that way. He's warning against impulsive commitments. And so here first he talks about building a house. Just in the last handful of weeks, my wife Karen and I, we moved to the Sterling Heights area. So we are now residents of Sterling Heights. We don't live too far from here. And that move was something we really sat and thought about. We had to sell we knew we were going to have to sell our house in Auburn Hills. We really enjoyed the community. We liked the community. But there was a variety of factors that we began discussing. And ultimately, when we landed on that, we wanted to move. And the things we were prioritizing was cost, location, and a simpler life. Those were generally the three things that we were looking to do. And we knew we wanted to live in the kind of the community where we were ministering in. And so we knew this was kind of the general area. We had a price. It wasn't huge, so we had minimal targets to shoot at. And what we began to experience was that we were getting outbid by everybody. Because this market's crazy, right? If you're all looking for a house, you know what I'm talking about. But we started getting outbid. And so then, I don't remember if it was her or I, but one day we were on Zillow and we looked at this plot of land. And it was right near the Clinton River. There was acreage, there was beautiful trees, there was, it backed up right to the Clinton River. I mean, we would have been living on the Clinton River. And it was like, wow, that price and that much acreage, like this seems like a good idea. And then we were like, okay, but then you got to build something brand new. And you start looking at how much builders cost, and it was like, okay, well, that's even further out of our range. But then we were like, oh, they build houses in factories now. And you can get really good, the sticker price draws you in. You're like, okay, yes, I'm going to buy this house, I'm going to buy this land, and it's all going to work out great. And if all we did was examine Zillow and this website that builds houses, and started swiping credit cards and started applying for loans, and we started paying for things, people would say that's foolish, right? Because upon inspection, when we actually went to look at the land, you come to find out there actually used to be a house on this. But the Clinton River has this tendency of flooding. And it flooded the house, destroyed the house. And so then to own this land would require you to have all these different kinds of insurances because you're probably going to get your house destroyed. And then when you actually go to look at this, manufactured home, so to speak, there's about an extra $100,000 of costs that go beyond the sticker. We wouldn't have been able to do it. It would have been really foolish. And Jesus is calling to something so much greater than a house. He's calling to give our lives up. And if you're going to give your life up, won't you first sit down and inspect whether or not you're willing to do it, whether you're willing to go all the way? Because when we looked at that, when we started getting all the details and we started getting all the information, it was like, we'll pass. That won't work for us. And I think how these work so well together is that there's an escalation. Jesus moves from saying, hey, pay attention to what it would cost to build something, to then saying, pay attention because you're going to war. Right? He escalates from building to war. And he says, and which of you wouldn't, if you had 10,000 soldiers, would you really go up against 20,000? Would you really, once you start seeing, hey, do we have the artillery? Do we have the ammunition? Do we have everything that we would need to war against this army? And I'm telling you, there will be times in the Christian life where from every angle it feels like you're being surrounded. There will be times where the trials of life will come against you, that will plead with you and tell you that God is not good. Are you still going to trust his character? You're You're still going to trust him. I hope I'm not teaching you anything new in this and saying what I'm going to say next, but biblical Christianity is not popular in society. And are you willing to be ridiculed? Are you willing to be viewed as a person that seems outdated, that seems ignorant, that seems dumb? I mean, that's how our society portrays biblical Christianity. Are we going to trust and believe that Jesus is enough, even when nobody else is validating that he is? We often want the benefits of following Jesus without counting the cost. We love the ideas of blessing. We love the idea of provision. We love the idea, of a God of grace. But are we willing to take on the trial, to take on the cost? One New Testament example of this was the Apostle Paul. Man, I would just love to be able to communicate the gospel like Paul does in Romans. I mean, Romans is this manifesto work that when you read it, you're just like, Paul's on a different wavelength, right? I would love to be able to speak the gospel like Paul. But I don't know if I want to go through what Paul went through to be able to actually speak like that. You see, when Paul became a Christian, it was on this road called on the way to Damascus. And Jesus appears to him on the road. It blinds him. He falls off a horse. And Jesus ultimately tells him, hey, Paul, you're going to come and follow me now. And as he goes into the town and he's sitting there, God says to a guy named Ananias, he says, hey, Ananias, I want you to go. I know he's rough around the edges. I know he's kind of a scary figure to you guys. But there's this guy, Saul, and he's at Straight Street, but go there. He's in a house, and I need you to explain something to him. Saul's depravity was so bad that Ananias begins to argue with God in a vision. How deplorable do you have to be where you're going to argue to God in a vision, where God's literally telling you, go do something. Hey, God, I don't know if you thought this through, but Saul's a pretty bad dude. Right? So he lays that out for him. Ananias goes, and what's the message that God wants Saul to know? He says, go and tell Saul all the things that he's going to suffer for my sake. So in that moment, Saul gets told, hey, coming to Jesus, it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you a lot. You're going to suffer, and it's not going to be easy. And hey, Emperor Nero ultimately he's going to have your head chopped off. That's the good life. Go give your life to it. And so Paul has the opportunity to see all the things that he's going to have to suffer for the sake of the gospel. He was able to see the cost, but he ultimately, in seeing the beauty of Christ, he saw it as worth it. He saw it as a deal of a lifetime. To be his disciple, we have to be willing to go all in. This means your comfort, your status, even your possessions. Say, no, it's all for you, Christ, however you want to use my life. C.S. Lewis once said this in the book Mere Christianity. Christianity, if false, is of no importance, and if true, of infinite importance. The only thing it cannot be is moderately important. We don't get the opportunity to be 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and following after Jesus. Lastly, I want to talk about the necessity of full commitment. This is Luke 14, verses 34 to 35. Salt is good for seasoning, but if it loses its flavor, how do you make it salty again? Flavorless salt is good neither for the soil nor for the manure pile. It's thrown away. Anyone with ears to hear should listen and understand. What Jesus just did could feel like a Quentin Tarantino movie, where it switches from one thing to another really fast without a whole lot of context of why it just switched. Right? Jesus is just saying, hey, love me more than mom and dad. Love me. And then he goes into saying, hey, and my love for me is going to cost you something. Think about what it's going to cost. Salt is good. What? Okay, this guy needs some examination, because where is that coming from? Why are we talking about salt? Jesus ends his teaching here with a metaphor about salt. In the ancient world, and even today, salt isn't just a flavor enhancer, it's a preservative, essential for life. But if salt loses its flavor, it becomes useless. It cannot fulfill its purpose. In the same way, a half-hearted follower of Jesus cannot fulfill the purpose that God has for us. When we try to do this 1 foot in, 1 foot out, we try to play the world, we try to do the party scene on Saturday night, but then we come here on Sunday morning and we do the church thing. He says, hey, it doesn't work. You try to blend these worlds. That's oil and water. You've diluted it and you've ruined it when you try to play the world and the church. He says, if we aren't fully committed, we can't fulfill the purpose God has for us. We become like flavorless salt, good for nothing. I want you to see this. The words exactly that he used is that it's worthless, good for nothing. And he even extends it, it's good neither for the manure pile. Jesus says it's not worthy of crap. And if you think that was too crass, take it up with Jesus. I'm just saying what he said. John Mark Comer says this in his book, Live No Lies. The danger of living in two worlds, half for Jesus and half for ourselves, is that we lose our ability to be the distinct, holy people God calls us to be. We don't bear the identity. We don't extend the love and the grace in the ways that God's called us to. Have you ever eaten food without salt? We got some healthy people in the room, right? My wife believes that I use a little bit too much of the Himalayan salt when I cook. I like flavor. Sue me, I mean, saltless food is pretty bland. It's not so good. I'm not a nutritionist, obviously. So I feel like I can tell you to try this out. Try to get an order of saltless fries from McDonald's, and then compare it to a salted order of fries from McDonald's. I'm sorry, and you're welcome. Right? There used to be a trick back in the day, because if you wanted fresh McDonald's fries, you'd say, can I get them saltless? And then you would add your salt later, because they would have to make you new fries. They got hip to that trick and no longer salt their fries until they put them in the bag. So you can tell I've had a little bit of McDonald's in my day. But the saltless food lacks vibrancy. It lacks the purpose that it's being used for. And Jesus is saying that our lives are meant to be like that seasoning to the world, full of flavor, purpose, and distinction. But if we're not fully devoted to him, we lose that flavor. That's the difference. It's almost like, hey, this is the picture of Jesus, but I'm also playing the world. It's that disappointment when you bite into a fry that has no salt on it. And so the question we have to ask is, are we living a fully devoted life to Jesus? Are we living in two worlds? Are we holding back parts of ourselves? Are we truly all in? Have we pushed all the chips in? That doesn't mean you don't get to own a car or a house. It means that car and house ought to be used for God and his purposes. That might mean housing somebody. That might mean hosting. That might mean having a couch that's available for somebody that's going through something to come and sit on. But ultimately, that space is used for God. Charles Spurgeon once said this: if Christ is not all to you, he is nothing to you. He will never go into partnership as part savior of men. If he be something, he must be everything. And if he be not everything, he is nothing to you. This call is radical. Man, I think that we could get a lot more converts if we preached a message that said, hey, you only have to give Jesus 1 foot. You can still do your comforts. You can still do your own thing. You can still live your own life. And yet, if you just show up to church sometimes, if you just use your spiritual gift in little ways, if we lessened the call to Jesus, of Jesus, I think we could see more people saying, yeah, I'm willing to give 1 foot. I'm willing to give a little bit. But church family, correct me if I'm wrong, and I would feel that email, I would feel that call this week. If you say, I'm missing something here, and Jesus isn't calling us for everything, then I'd love to know if I'm missing something. But to me, Jesus seems to be very cut and dry. He seems to be very clear about what it means to follow him. And it's your life. The totality of your life. That we would become the people that keeps its flavor, that we would become that man that has found the one thing that we'd be willing to die for. You might have other things, but is Jesus the preeminent, top, highest, greatest of our allegiances that we'd say, hey, he is worthy of every bit of my allegiance? Do we view him that way? Have we given our lives to him that way? I was just chatting this week with a couple of our ladies here about our social media. And I said, one thing that we can see in today's world is that there's a lot of churches out here, right? There's a lot of churches that are out, and if we take the words of Jesus seriously, then churches better be fishing. When Jesus calls Peter in Matthew 4, he says, hey, I'm going to call you to be a fisher of men. There's a whole sea of people out there. I want you to go after them, and you better get to fishing. And so if we're the church and we're following that command, if we're following that, then we have to be casting our net, because there's people in these communities that desperately need Jesus. But I think that what you can look at is a lot of churches, we're throwing our reels out there, we're throwing our lines out there, and we're discussing which lure is the best. What's going to hook people? What's going to get them? And I think there's a great danger in examining our lures and saying, well, can I exchange Jesus for something else? Is there something else that will hook, line, and sink somebody better than Jesus? And maybe it's, hey, come this Sunday, we're going to give away an Xbox. Anybody that's new get to throw their name in the raffle. Well, hey, there's churches that are doing that. And I'm not here to judge other churches. I'm just saying we have to be careful what we're fishing with. We got to be careful what our lure is, because what you win people with is what you win them to. And so if you hook, line, and sunk somebody with Xbox, what did they come for? Xbox. And how do you keep them? With more games and other things like it. In church, I just want to be crystal clear. One of the pillars of who we are as Fellowship Church is that we are a Christ-centered community. He's become everything. He's become everything. He's our lure. He's our win. He's our prize. If we're going to say give your life to anything, it's going to be Jesus. Jesus Christ and him crucified. He is worthy of your life. He's worthy of your time, your talent, your treasures. He's worthy to go all in on. He's better than Xbox. I think he's the best lure in the world. Only him and only he can bring along transformation of your life. Only he can give you the power over sin. Only he can take a sinner and make him a saint. That's what we get in Jesus. The life-transforming power of him. I don't want to fish with anything else, church. I don't want to lessen our lures. I think we have the greatest one. And I think he has to become central to our identity as a church. So that when a world's looking for hope, and it's looking for life, and it's looking for salvation, they don't get lost because we say Xbox. That they can find this life-saving message of Jesus Christ here at Fellowship Church. And that is a pillar that we will stand on now and for as long as I'm here. And if you're here today and you don't know Jesus, he hasn't become that one thing to go all in on. I want to invite you to that. I want to invite you to the greatest relationship you could ever experience on this side of eternity and the next. It's a relationship with Jesus Christ. You see, the story is that God created the world and created everything in it, but then there was this thing in Genesis 3, becomes kind of problematic. It's called sin. Sin enters the world and it disrupts and destroys everything. And there becomes this great chasm between God and man. And so many people throughout millennia have tried to get across that chasm, have tried to find ways to real life and to real salvation. But you only get across that chasm on the bridge of Jesus Christ. It's only him that reconciles us to the Father. Because he became sin for us, that he became he took on the penalty of sin so that we could have life and eternal life at that. And so God is inviting you, he is welcoming you, he wants you to come, and it's through Jesus, the friend of sinners. Hey, you might be a sinner in here, and you might say, hey, I've been convicted by the word. That's okay. Jesus is a friend of sinners. And he's the one that takes us into the kingdom. And so that's your invitation this morning. If you never have committed your life to being in relationship with Jesus, I want that to happen today. That's been my agenda this whole 40 minutes that I've had with you, is that if you have not given your life to the greatest of relationships, and he has not become your greatest of allegiances, then today would that happen. He is far better than anything else we could give our lives to. Everything else will perish. You're invited. It's through confession and repentance. It's a declaration that Jesus is Lord and that I'm going to follow him in obedience. And perfectly as I do it, I'm going to follow him. That's the invitation this morning. Let me pray for us.